In Proverbs chapter 1, why does wisdom call out to people in the common places, yet refuses to be found by certain people? See, wisdom is personified as saying, they will call upon me, but I won't answer. They will seek me, but they won't find me, which seems to contradict Jesus' words in Matthew's gospel. Doesn't God want us to have wisdom? So what's really going on here? By the end of this, you'll know how to study the Bible better, and you'll gain some useful Bible study skills. If you're new to the Bible, I believe that this beginner's Bible study guide will especially bless you. Let's jump into Proverbs chapter 1. We are officially in Proverbs chapter 1, starting in verse 20. It says, "Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the market, she raises her voice." Now, if you didn't watch the last Bible study walkthrough, we talked about possibly the significance of the street and the markets, which does note that these are the common places where you have a lot of foot traffic, where everyone ends up finding themselves, where there's a lot of people. Wisdom is very public, very loud, very direct. And wisdom cries aloud at the head of the noisy streets. She cries out. At the entrance of the city gates, she speaks. And we talked about the significance of the gates being that place of decision. Elders, authority figures in a community would come to convene and figure things out. People coming in, people coming out. So we're supposed to see wisdom as being everywhere and anywhere, really. And so as we read the Bible, what we want to be thinking about, based on whatever it is that we're reading, where are we at in the literary context of this writing? Where are we at in the literary narrative context of the entire Bible? Where are we at? We want to know the setting. We want to know who's around. So we know that Solomon is writing this to his son, or really to anyone who wants to heed the voice of wisdom and become wise. And wisdom here is crying out, whether Solomon recognizes it or not. I'd say he does recognize it because he says, "Listen to my wisdom." But wisdom is crying out through Solomon. And so we just want to keep tabs on what it is that Solomon has already said in the last few verses, lest we forget these things. We want to hold these main ideas in our hands as we're reading a text. And so Solomon has talked about how really the evil people and sinners who are trying to entice people who are simple, these evil sinners are greedy for unjust gain, and in the process of trying to take advantage of another, they end up losing their lives along the way. And so now, contrasted with the kind of secretive, very deceptive voice of the sinner and the fool, we have wisdom crying out in the streets, markets, noisy streets, gates. So I want you guys to be thinking about when you see a list appear in the scriptures, be thinking about the similarities between those ideas. If there's any main underlying idea that's being communicated by each of these things in the list. How long? And here's what wisdom is crying out. Okay, so I want to be thinking about what wisdom is saying in comparison to, or in light of, what Solomon has just said in the previous verses about really a sinner scheming and enticing and drawing people away and condemning the righteous and killing the innocent. And I want to be thinking about that. And wisdom is crying out, "How long, O simple ones? How long will you love," if you can see this, flatten it out a bit, "will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge?" And so we're getting a pretty clear description of the simple that wisdom is crying out for. Wisdom is really available to anyone, but specifically this call is directed at a kind of person, those who are simple. And these people who wisdom is really trying to change and get a hold of, they love being simple. Let's see if I can hold it like this. I want it to be flat for you guys. There we go. That works for me. Okay. These people love being simple. They're scoffers that delight in their scoffing, and they're fools that hate knowledge. Okay. And this doesn't mean this is the only kind of fool, but this is the primary kind of simple fool that wisdom is crying out to. So we should be asking, why these specific questions is wisdom asking? Why is wisdom asking, how long will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing? What is it that scoffers delight in particularly about their scoffing? What is this? And fools, why do they hate knowledge? What is the reason for this? We've seen a few verses already in the first chapter that kind of giving us an insight into why they do. And wisdom says, if you turn at my reproof And so what is wisdom offering? Reproof, correction, the ability to change course. If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. Now that just triggers my mind and makes me think of all kinds of passages where God is seen to be pouring out his spirit, where Jesus talks about pouring out his spirit, or on the day of Pentecost, on the disciples in the upper room, the Spirit of God is poured out, or in Joel's prophecy. So when you see one of those phrases or ideas in the Bible that is a very common motif or pattern or idea, just think question mark, question mark, question mark. Where else do I see this concept of the Spirit of God being poured out? In this context, it's for wisdom's sake, to become not a scoffer, right? To change, to not be a fool anymore, to turn at the reproof of wisdom. And apparently, if these fools regard her voice, if these fools turn at her reproof, which is it's interesting that wisdom is characterized and described as a woman, then they will have this spirit of wisdom poured out upon them. And wisdom says, I will make my words known to you. So apparently, wisdom wants to pour out her spirit. Wisdom wants to make her words known to people, but it's their decision. This is the human responsibility element. It is our responsibility to actually heed the voice of wisdom and turn and be open and be receptive and be willing to change. Because wisdom is being presented and offered and communicating all her benefits in the streets and all the different places, but not everyone wants to listen to her voice, okay? And so wisdom goes on to say, because I've called and you refused to listen. Right? Remember how I asked the question, what does it mean for a fool to hate knowledge? Here's part of the answer. And sometimes as you read the Bible, you'll have questions arise and you don't know the answer. But if you keep reading throughout that chapter, or if you go through the entire book that you're reading, you may get your answer once you get all the data. And so I think we've begun to get our answer to the question of what does it mean to hate knowledge. These scoffers or simple ones or fools hate knowledge and refuse to listen to wisdom's voice. And apparently, wisdom has called. There's been a history, right? Wisdom has called and they continually refuse to listen. And because I've stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, because you've ignored all my counsel. So notice all the different ways. I just want to be paying attention to all the different ways wisdom explains how they reject her wisdom. Number one, these people are refusing. It's an obstinate, kind of stiff-necked unbelief, and they have not heeded or listened to or regarded, right? There's not just this, unwillingness to turn and to change, but as you're not even willing to entertain the voice of wisdom and consider what she's saying. And because you've ignored, this is the third way, they're characterized as rejecting wisdom. Because you've ignored all my counsel, right? So not only are these ideas connected, refusing, not heeding, ignoring, all essentially the same, different ways of saying the same thing, but notice she's calling. She's stretching out her hands. She's providing counsel, right? So we might say that the counsel here becomes connected to or possibly synonymous with the stretching out of the hand. What is it that wisdom's offering by stretching out her hand? Counsel, right? What is wisdom offering by calling out and declaring with her voice? She's offering counsel. But people don't want to be counseled. People don't want to change. People don't want to be wrong. People aren't willing to entertain the idea that they're not entirely correct on some things, okay? So because of all this, because you would have none of my reproof, which is another way of saying you reject my counsel, here's wisdom's response. This is not wisdom's first decision. This is not how wisdom presents herself initially. This is all because of the fool and the simple ones continually rejecting, refusing, stiffening their necks, ignoring. Because of that, wisdom says, I also will laugh at your calamity. So I just want to be thinking about this. She's saying, I also, as if to say, you guys have done this. But when did the fool, the simple one, laugh at what wisdom was offering? Actually, right up here. They're declared to be scoffers, and they delight in their scoffing, essentially hating the knowledge wisdom is offering. Wisdom is saying, I have some knowledge. These guys are mocking it. Sure you do. And after enough time, wisdom, the result, or rather the consequence, you might say, of rejecting these opportunities to become wise and change, is that wisdom stands in opposition to you as if to be laughing, as if to be making a kind of mockery, not that God loves and delights in the suffering of the sinner, but wisdom here is standing against the sinner and laughing at their calamity. And the wisdom says, I will mock when terror strikes you, because you didn't come under my protection and wisdom. So there is a kind of like, I told you so, like I warned you. When terror strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you. Hey, if you don't know me, my name is Jason, and I have some free gifts for you on our website at abovereproachministry.com. Maybe you want to learn how to study the Bible. We have free Bible classes just for you. Are you maybe a newer believer? Go ahead and check out our Christianity 101 Foundations course. Maybe you hate videos. Well, we have a podcast, so you can listen to all of our messages on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Maybe you want to join or start a discussion group. Check out our map of all the current armed discussion groups all around the world. And do you maybe live near Greenville, South Carolina? If you do, you should check out our church. Visit movementchurchsc.com for more information. And if you'd like to partner with us financially, you can snag a copy of my book, Fruitful, or head over to the donate page and donate through debit or credit card, PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, Patreon, or even mail a check to P.O. Box 509, Inman, South Carolina. And if you want to make a ministry connection, feel free to reach out to me on our website. All right, I know that was a lot, but I'm done. So let's get back to the video. Solomon could have just said, hey, wisdom is, going to be bummed out that you didn't heed her voice. Instead of Solomon just being like, hey, wisdom is offering you to change, the opportunity to change, and if you continue down this road, like, it's going to be a big bummer for you. Solomon is poetically kind of framing up these consequences in different ways. And when you read the Bible, don't fly past this poetic language or the really vivid imagery that the authors of the Bible will use. It's as if wisdom is laughing at calamity, mocking at terror. When terror strikes, number one, like a storm. What about a storm is, likened to terror? How is terror like a storm in this? I just want to be asking that question. When you read the Bible, do that. Ask questions. Why is terror being compared to a storm here? Instead of presuming and assuming, why don't you just ask the text and keep reading? And your calamity comes like a whirlwind. Okay, so here's a second image used to describe the terror or calamity that comes upon the foolish sinner the more they reject wisdom. It's a storm and a whirlwind. So I should be asking, these two images are communicating the same idea. The storm and the whirlwind, what do they have in common? Well, they're pretty violent. Well, they're pretty aggressive. They can be pretty sudden. Winds can kick up like that. A storm can come out of nowhere. And there's probably other parallels between them. When distress and anguish come upon you, right? So we have all these different consequences for the fool rejecting wisdom. There's terror, there's calamity, there's distress, there's anguish. Like, this doesn't sound like a fantastic experience. And some passages come to mind for me of Jonah being in the middle of the storm because he rejected really the call of God to go to Nineveh. He finds himself caught up in a storm. I think of how Jesus is in a storm, but not for his own, disobedience. It's precisely because he's been faithful to the Father and he's in obedience to the Father. So that might be a different image that might not relate. But as I think of storms in the Bible, it's helpful to think through, where else in the Bible do storms suddenly kick up? What's the context? What causes that? Who's the character? What was their, responsibility in, coming into that storm themselves? So there's a sense in which the fool kind of brings a storm upon their own lives. They're thrown into chaos. And this image of a storm and whirlwind throughout the Bible is really the anti-image of order and structure and God's hand of favor on something, what promotes life. Like, these foolish sinners are destroying themselves and descending into a kind of creation, right? Where God in Genesis chapter 1 orders and creates and structures. These people are living out of disorder and chaos and descending into further depravity. Verse 28, and wisdom goes, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. That's kind of abrupt. It's kind of rough, right? I did not expect the spirit of wisdom to not answer when people call. So I should probably ask, why the heck is wisdom not answering? I mean, if people ask for wisdom, James chapter 1 tells us, and it's what's interesting is in James chapter 1, and this is what we do when we read the Bible. We compare images, right? So I think of God tells us to ask for wisdom in James chapter 1. And when you do, God will give that. Don't ask in doubting, right? But ask in faith. Because if you doubt, you're like a wave of the sea tossed to and fro by the winds. So more storm imagery. But here, I think about, this seems to contradict that. Like God offers wisdom, but here someone's calling upon wisdom, and wisdom's like silent, not answering. Like the gods, like Baal, the god of the Canaanites, the fake god of the Canaanites. In Elijah's day, they have that battle on Mount Carmel. The prophets of Baal there, or Baal, if you say it that way. The prophets of Baal, they're worshiping, crying out, where are you, Baal? He's silent. So that just reminds me of like, hey, this idea of like this person who's persisting in rebellious idolatry and unbelief, like crying out, no one's there. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me. In Matthew chapter 7, or Matthew 6 or 7, it's in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, ask, and it will be given. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened. Right? And this seems to directly contradict that. So there must be something else going on if this seems to initially contradict what I know of Scripture. So let's keep reading, and it'll maybe become clear what it means that wisdom is not answering, or you're not finding wisdom, because they hated knowledge. So we at least have the reason, right? Why aren't they finding wisdom? Why isn't wisdom answering their call? Because they hated knowledge. And they didn't choose the fear of the Lord. Now, this is fascinating, that the fear of the Lord here is pretty much not just a component of knowledge, but like directly synonymous with knowledge itself. Now, in the Hebrew, probably not, but within the ideas being communicated, it's as if knowledge and the fear of the Lord, yes, different words in the Hebrew, it's as if they, though, are synonymous ideas, communicating the same thing. You hated knowledge, you didn't choose to fear the Lord, they're one and the same, and you would have none of wisdom's counsel, which is very interesting. Wisdom is offering counsel that we can reject. We can reject, or we can accept it. Which one will you do? Just because wisdom is available doesn't mean you'll benefit from the counsel wisdom is offering, right? And so the fear of the Lord is always at the center of whatever counsel or knowledge or wisdom God is offering us in the world, right? So this is how we begin to discern between true godly biblical wisdom versus the worldly wisdom, which can often look very similar, right, if we're not careful. And because you despised all of my reproof. So what is it that these foolish sinners have rejected time and time again consistently? It's an ongoing, perpetual state of rebellion. They've rejected reproof, counsel, fear of the Lord, and knowledge. Now, if you have the ability to do so, open up a software like Logos and look up the Hebrew word for knowledge or fear or counsel or reproof and compare. Think about how they are similar. Think about how they're different. That's just what I would recommend. When you come across all these a list of different words, therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way and have their fill of their own devices. And we'll continue here in the next Bible study walkthrough. But for now, just know this, what it means, because this is how we begin to answer. What does it mean that wisdom isn't answering? What does it mean that wisdom is not being found by these people who are looking? Well, they're going to eat the fruit of their way, whether they like it or not. In other words, their fill of their own devices, they're getting the consequences of their actions, right? They are going to reap what they have sown. There's no way to avoid that. You have planted a certain kind of seed. It's going to yield a kind of consequence and result. You can't escape that. The fruit of your way, right? You lived this way for so long, there's fruit that comes from that you're going to have to eat. This is a very vivid way of describing, like, you get what you sow. You really do. And for them, they're essentially, the foolish sinner here is calling out for wisdom to spare them from these consequences. Okay, I suddenly want wisdom all of a sudden, but you don't really want wisdom. You just want to escape the consequences and not have to deal with that. And then as soon as wisdom bails you out, if she did, you'd go right back to depravity and sinful living, right? Or, wisdom is not found by these people. They're only looking for wisdom to get them out of the pickle that they're in and the temporary consequences they're facing. So these are not people who have a genuine heart and pursuit of wisdom. They're not loving the things of God and desiring for his wisdom. They just don't want to deal with the consequences of their way. Now, as I think about that, when I read the Bible, I want to be thinking, are there any biblical characters, any stories throughout the narrative of Scripture that fit this description? And I can say, yeah, there's a bunch, but primarily who comes to mind for me first is King Saul. King Saul definitely didn't really care for the voice of God and the word of the Lord until all of a sudden Samuel says, you know what? The kingdom of God has been torn from you. All of a sudden Saul's like, okay, I'm sorry. You're not sorry. You just don't want to deal with the consequences, and you want God to bail you out, and eventually you'll just do the same thing again and again and again. And Saul had chance after chance. So Saul becomes an image or a representation of this foolish, simple sinner here in Proverbs chapter 1. So we'll continue in verse 31 in the next Bible study walkthrough. In the meantime, just meditate on these few verses we went through. Do I ever find myself, having similar tendencies as what's described here of the fool? Do I ever find myself just wanting God to bail me out of the consequences of my own decisions and actions, but not really wanting him, not really wanting his wisdom? I just want to escape the problems. Does that ever describe me in my life? So thanks for watching today's Bible study walkthrough. We will continue in verse 31 and probably finish the rest of the chapter in the next study. And in the meantime, go watch our other Bible study walkthroughs in the book of Proverbs. This wisdom literature is rich and deep, and I will see you guys later. Hey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more biblical content just like this. We have hundreds of videos, but you might be most interested in these ones right here. Also, visit our website for all of our free resources and classes. And thank you so much for partnering with us financially to make this ministry even possible. Keep moving towards Jesus, and I'll see you in the next video.